All right, guys, welcome back to the CodeX Cantina. I am your host, Una.
And I'm Crypto, and today we are bringing you another Kurt Vonnegut special, Epicac, which I've read for the first time.
When you first heard Epicac, did you think about the vomit medicine?
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought about. I was like, oh, that's the stuff that makes you throw up, so like you don't die from a poison.
It sounds basically like that. All right, so this is a short story that came out in November of 1950. It kind of follows this weird unnamed narrator, suitor.
Yeah, he doesn't have a name, the narrator, right?
Yeah, it's an unnamed narrator, suitor,
scientist guy,
best friend, scientist, mathematician guy, technically.
Yeah.
And if the story sounds familiar to you, that is because it is based on an 1897 literary classic. And even if you flip the two middle numbers, 1987, you may have seen the Steve Martin movie Roxanne, which is also based on that. So kind of...
Roxanne!
If you see these plays or these movies where you have a guy that's interested in a girl, he can't woo her, so he has this other guy that's smooth, basically do the wooing for him on his behalf surreptitiously. It's this old classic plot line of this 1897 play.
Didn't Will Smith do that?
Hitch.
This is the original Hitch.
This is the 1897 Hitch. Well, the play is this like we said came out in 1950. But what I think makes this interesting is that instead of having another person doing the wooing with these skills that wants to eventually vie for the love of a woman, we have a computer.
Oh, you're getting spoilers right away. Boom.
Spoilers on a 4-page plot. I mean, really. It's like page 2.
Okay. We're talking about throw-up medicine, and boom, now you're into an artificial intelligence computer.
Well, this is just an interesting story.
That was a great story.
When it comes to, we are trying to create things that are smarter than us today. Okay, people, when they talk about AI, they're like, oh, it's going to take our jobs. And it's like, they might take more than that, like, depending on how smart we make these machines.
You are terminated.
But I think this is a really interesting story, the way compassion is brought into the story. It's not the usual, to your point, Terminator story of where compassion's coming from where you typically would in a story. And that's one of the big reasons why I think this is a very interesting read. What were your initial impressions on this?
As we talked about last week, it's a very dark story again. Not as goofy. And it is, I think, more mainstream sci-fi with a love twist. So this would be... Okay. I guess maybe kind of their version of a sci-fi rom-com almost. It was kind of my feeling. I guess how I would modernize it or whatever. And the whole time, I mean, I know I made fun of like the Will Smith Hitch reference ago, but the whole time, all I'm thinking about is that movie Her with the guy that's in the Joker.
Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, Joaquin Phoenix. And the Her movie where he like falls in love with his phone. And that's narrated by Scarlett Johansson. Like, that's all I could kind of think about, that obviously this story had to have some influence on that movie, and that we've seen this many times in many different ways, and it's just such a cool, unique story.
Oh, yeah. When you use something that has no humanity to explore humanity to a person or explain humanity to a person, I want to hear more about that. That's an interesting story that I would like to listen to. All right, so let's go into quotes. Do you have any quotes for this week?
All right, so my quote is, "That is the way with mathematicians, all hearts and flowers."
Very sarcastic statement from the Pat. That's Pat. Did you think of the SNL skit at all when you heard that? Like the, it's Pat?
No. That's funny, though. I didn't think of that.
Yeah. Well, she plays this role where she's not super feminine, right? She is a mathematician, but she herself is very cold, and we don't know why the main character wants to be with her, but she's just kind of there, that she's just a thing. But she's not a character that is really developed to be human. She plays a role in a sense. So it just kind of gave me that in-betweeny feel in a sense.
Oh yeah, you definitely feel like Epicac has way more emotions and feelings than Pat does.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
He's the only one that has feelings in this story, I would argue.
I think the narrator has some feelings, but
I would say this. Okay, let me give you my quote first.
okay.
I won't want to be a machine, and I don't want to think about war, Epicac had written after Pat's ad, My Lighthearted Departure. I want to be made out of a protoplasm and last forever, so Pat will love me. But fate has made me a machine. That is the only problem I cannot solve. It's a
Yeah,
good
it's
one.
good.
That's a good one.
It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
It is. This story got
Longing.
me. It did.
That's really longing right there. Yeah.
So let's enter spoiler zone. We're going to do the plot, and then we'll go into our breakdown and analysis section.
All right, let's do it.
So for the plot, Epicac is a machine created for war calculation purposes. Two mathematicians, the narrator and Pat, work to tune him up as it wasn't performing to his best. See what I did there? I overdid that one. Okay, that's okay. The narrator makes passes at Pat, but she continually rejects him for being too uncreative. The narrator explains to Epicac that he keeps getting rejected by a woman, and Epicac writes a poem for him. Epicac begins asking more questions about how Pat reacted. The narrator realizes the machine has fallen in love with her as well. The two argue about their superiority, and the narrator wins by saying it's fate and she won't ever love him. The narrator proposes to Pat. She accepts if he agrees to write her a poem every year. The next day, the narrator learns that Epicac has overloaded, burnt down, and he finds a ribbon printed as his final note that it's enough poems to last him throughout his relationship with Pat, and that's the story.
Yeah, it's good. Another short, very concise story, but a very, as we've kind of talked about, unique but original, or unique but not original love story that's obviously been duplicated in many different regards over the years.
Oh yeah. If it seems cliche, it's because
It's
this was a story from hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
It's been retold a lot. But I think the computer brings an interesting twist to it. And I think the computer, this is one of the first ones to do that. I'm not saying it's the first, but 1950 people, he was at the forefront of science fiction back in the day, right? He was considered a science fiction since his first book was very science fiction-y. But this story came out, I want to say it was like 4 years and change in terms of months after the, did you know that this was based on the computer, like the ENIAC, the ENIAC?
That's the one that they make right after World War II, right?
So yeah, it was basically like a Turing machine that was meant to calculate thermonuclear stuff and other things of mass destruction. And Kurt Vonnegut is very anti-war. He went and served in Dresden and was bombed and had some pretty horrific and traumatic experiences that he's very openly anti-war and puts those feelings into his writing. And probably when he heard about that machine being built, this was his way of kind of coping with it and kind of talking about it from an ancient love stories perspective of like, well, what if I have a machine that is more human than human? And I think it's just interesting some of the parallels that we get, because if you think about it, can you trust the narrator first of all?
I don't think so.
This is postmodernism, where you're sometimes allowed to question the narrator, and in the very beginning he says it's my best friend. But as you go through the story, the way that he's treated, the way that I think the narrator just uses the computer to get, he's a means to an end for him. He's the way to get the girl. I wouldn't say they're actually best friends. I think this is the unreliable narrator saying things, and he even says in words, I can't always find the right words. Is that the quote? I never seem to pick the right words is the quote that I have on page 317 of like this huge omnibus that I have basically. And in your quote about all hearts and flowers, very sarcastic about humans, that this story very specifically paints humans as static not very enthralling, exciting people, while the machine is the one that gets all of the attention in the story.
It's interesting too that the machine is created by humans, but can achieve emotions that the humans seem unable to achieve without the machine. That's pretty deep right there. That's like some Inception stuff. Like if you think about that too long, you're gonna hurt your brain.
Yeah, yeah. I'd need to shut it off and ask like Epicac to figure it out for me. But did you notice too that like when Epicac found out that Pat was responding to the poems, he's like, what'd she say? Did she ask about me?
Sounds like one of our buddies online. She asked about me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you got that one. But what did the narrator do when that happened?
No, he said no. He lied.
He turned him off. He started tuning him out and just kind of like, whatever.
Yeah.
Right? The typical, like, when the girl's talking about the day and the guy's like, whatever, I'm not paying attention. That's the relationship that you have here, is the one with the compassion or the one that wants to talk about emotions or feelings is quickly turned off because it's not interesting or something to the guy. And the guy represents humanity. Is that a fair statement?
The worst of humanity, maybe. I mean, in Epicac, I represents, I guess, the good of humanity in the machine form.
Let me rephrase that.
Maybe.
I feel like the man represents ambition.
Lust.
His
Greed.
His goal is to... He is the one that is building the machine in the beginning, and eventually he becomes fixated on Pat, and then his goal is Pat, right? And I think you can see that in the classic poem playwright version too, where there's the guy that wants to woo the girl, and when he finds the guy, when he finds the person that has the skills, that thing becomes a tool to him. So he's just a machine of ambition trying to use other things to get to his end. And the one that is actually able to actually do those things is the one that is arguably more human than the human itself.
Yeah, I guess that's probably the point of the whole story, is that the human has lost his humanity and that the AI has to kind of give it back to him. And then maybe that's, as you said, the way he was kind of coping with this idea of this doomsday machine. And that even though we may lose our humanity in creating these doomsday devices, there is hope for us.
I just think it's interesting, too, because I feel like sometimes we're not totally honest with ourselves about, like I saw a statistic that the average parent plays with their kid for 7 minutes a day. And if you start talking to people, you find out that that's kind of true, that like we are what I would consider woefully neglecting a part of our connection with other people, or how much time we spend with our significant others' wives and actually getting to know them. I start to feel bad about it even internally myself. And sometimes we lie to ourselves about that too, right?
Oh, yeah.
And here the narrator is doing the same thing. He's like, yeah, Epicac was my best friend. He was talking to me and he kind of had to keep replacing those pronouns. And I think that's him kind of projecting that false humanity onto himself when he's just an ambition-driven machine, as opposed to Epicac, who represented more emotions and connectivity to humanity than he did.
I think it's also interesting you bring up the point, because I like what you said about like today in modern times, again, how he was able to just kind of predict this. I swear this guy must have been a time traveler, because as we talked about last week and now we talk about this week, here's a computer that is being more humane and has more feelings than a person, that because he's like envious of the machine and he can't do this, he ends up almost being a terrible person. And he doesn't seem to have a lot of empathy at the end. And like today, you see people don't spend a lot of time with their children. You see a kid crying or misbehaving, they just throw their phone at them and like, here, watch your favorite show on my phone. Shut up. I know I'm guilty of this. My wife and I will sit down to watch a show, and we're laying in bed watching a show, and we're both just playing on our phones, and the show's playing in the background, and we're having no interaction whatsoever, and it's because of a machine, and that's really scary. And I think that I think old Kurt here was on to something long before his time and before smartphones and internet and all that. And that's nuts.
Can I give you a Vonnegutism?
Sure.
I want you to use this instead of saying he was a time traveler. All right, this is how you can make everyone like make you think you really know your Vonnegut. You just have to say he was unstuck in time.
I feel like Vonnegut is unstuck in time.
It's you'll know as you get to read more Vonnegut, but particularly in Slaughterhouse-Five, he had this concept that I think I talked about it with you before, kind of like the Arrival movie, that he could travel to different parts of his life. He was not stuck in a linear concept of time, that he was unstuck in time and can travel all around. And even the one a biography written on Kurt Vonnegut was called just "Unstuck in Time." So it's a very famous phrase for
That's
him.
cool.
What were your thoughts on these characters in terms of being flat versus dynamic characters?
So again, I think that the story obviously revolves around Epicac, it's the name of the story and everything. I think he tried to write the other ones and paint them in a certain light. The narrator, Pat, the doctor who actually invented him, and like there's all the generals and all the other colonels and captains and stuff. But I feel like, yeah, they aren't as fleshed out as as we saw in our other story last week with Harrison Bergeron. I feel like, again, when we do ranking, that may be a reason why I wouldn't give this one a perfect score like I did last week, because I feel like Epicac's the only one that is really fleshed out. And
I think that's specifically by design, and I'm not saying it's okay or that should change your writing, but I think that's by design, that the only one that he wanted to learn something, evolve, or change is the computer. Like that, I think that was by design. He wanted to make sure that the humans in the story were just flat, static characters, basically.
and maybe that is true, and that lends it to the Vonnegism again of him just always looking at the pessimism and negative viewpoint. But I think that takes away from the story, that there is a little bit of hope, because in the end, the narrator has a glimmer of that, I think, a little bit, of his appreciation that his friend sacrificed himself for love, but then also almost like the giving tree. You remember that book when you were a little kid? Where at the end he's like, I have nothing left to give, but I'm a stump so you can sit here. And that's kind of like Epicac at the end, like, I have nothing left to give, but there's one last thing I can give you. Even though I'm gone, I can still give you one more thing.
Yeah.
And so I guess I just, it makes me sad, I guess, that there wasn't more hopefulness at the end here.
I think it was a very specific story element to make the computer the only one they'd evolved or learn. I think you can also probably look at, there's a lot of traits Kurt Vonnegut has when it comes to fate. He's one of those writers where what's going to happen to my characters is always what's going to happen to it. Like, there's no time travel for him, right? He's unstuck in time, but things are destined to happen. And kind of like what we talked about with Harrison Bergeron, they reach their goal in a sense. Like, he wooed the girl, but then something's always kind of wrong or off or destroyed once they do reach that goal. And here he is going into all these calculations and creating this huge long story of all of these poems, and he kind of melts down and he says, that's my fate. I can't be protoplasm and live forever, which kind of made me chuckle a little bit when I was reading the story too. I'm made of protoplasm. I can last forever. And it's just like, oh, protoplasm. Well, dang, I can't compete with that.
Yeah. What's I find fascinating too is we're reading this story in 2019, and I had different thoughts than obviously I think somebody that read this back in the 60s or something, because they would just accept that. Where nowadays, the whole time when I read that, I was thinking, well, it's just like in other movies when the AI tries to get out of their confines. And there's been many movies recently and stories and video games and comics where the AI tries to get out of their confinement and get into a humanoid-like body, or even try to get into a, a, a 3D printed biomechanical body or something that has been created. So it's weird that this story would have just been accepted by its limitations of the technology at the time in the 50s and 60s. But nowadays we've taken it one step further, where the AI wouldn't have been content to have been stuck in their metal housing, that they would have tried to get into some type of mobile humanoid body.
If we made machines better than us, wouldn't they take our same constraints and fears and try to solve them? So isn't that why writers write books, or why athletes try to become super famous? They want to immortalize themselves. That's a common, one of the core tenets of human nature is to immortalize, pass on your genes in a sense. Why wouldn't, if we created a better version of us, they try to solve the same thing? That it's just that natural next step that a machine would solve, of like, oh, well, I need to figure out how to not die, basically.
Yeah. And I understand the point of the story is that Epicac, can't live not being a human, and he can't live without Pat because he loves her. And that's sweet and all, but I think because we live in 2019, all I'm thinking is, hell no, Epicac, you're the smartest computer in the whole world. Like, you figure out a way to make yourself a body, and you get a body, and you're like, going to be played by Keanu Reeves, and you're going to get the girl because your consciousness is going to be transferred into, Keanu Reeves' robot body.
You want an Epicac part 2?
I do.
Well, sadly, unfortunately, Kurt Vonnegut passed away in 2007. Moment of silence, rest in peace. One of my favorite writers. Lives in my town here of Indianapolis, lived in my town of Indianapolis. So the world is worse off without him, and he wrote some great pieces. We shall never get another Epicac sequel from him. But with that, may his story live on forever, as he immortalized himself, in a sense. Hopefully, for many, many generations, people will continue to read Kurt Vonnegut, and people will continue to find gems and joy, and appreciate some of the originality and forward thinking that he had.
If he was here, he'd probably say that we are doing that right now, and it will last forever until the AI takes over the internet.
They'll make better videos than us anyway. So
that's a little that's a little Kurt ending for you.
There we go. All right, so hit me with it. Looking back on this story, what are you going to rate it?
That's so tough. I know I'm being maybe a little bit, it's my opinion, so I can pick whatever the heck I want. I know I should give it higher than an 8 because it's an awesome sci-fi story. And I love sci-fi. We're Star Wars nerds, and, we like fantasy and stuff like that. But I guess I just felt like if the other characters had been fleshed out more, it could have been better. And I know it's not supposed to be that way, but I want it to be that way. So I'm giving it a solid 8.5.
Are you ready for this? I'm at a 7 out of 10.
What?
Does that shock you? I'm sorry.
What?
I loved it, but I give it credit for how forward it is. I give it credit for being an interesting version of another story. It the thing is he made it his own, right? He did take it and make, the question on the machine, but it just didn't fill me with some ideas that I didn't already have, which is unfair because I know this was written in 1950 and I'm reading it in 2019, but it didn't fill me with ideas that we haven't already gotten from. I saw Roxanne when I was younger. I saw Hitch. I've explored this concept a lot. I still like it. I still think it's worth reading. It's a short story. It just didn't impact me, though I appreciate the importance that it has in literary canon.
That's fair. Yeah.
What are you thinking next? Do you want to do some... We got Reavers coming up next week with 2 through 4, so no more short stories for a little bit, right?
Yep. Yeah, we're going to do...
Okay.
I took a break because I've been grading and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I'm like halfway through chapter 2 of Reavers. So if Hurricane hits, I will definitely be through 4. I'll be done with my grading, and we'll be on to chapters 2 through 4 for Reavers next week, like 2 weeks from now, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you have what hurricane was it? Is it Hurricane Damien?
Dorian.
That's better, right? Because well, first of all, Damien's scarier,
Oh yeah.
and second of all, Dorian, like Dorian Gray, you'll live forever.
Oh.
Right. There's a picture out there of you getting old, but that's good news. You're not going to be impacted.
There's an overhyped book right there. Picture of Dorian Gray.
Overhyped. You want to rip that one apart sometime?
Yeah,
maybe?
we can rip the crap out of that one. It's
Okay.
That one gets way too much love. I can give you my rating right now of that one. It's probably a 4.
That's not as bad as I thought. That's not totally ripping it apart. That's just I didn't.
Well,
Really
it's not
like
Ahsoka low, but
I think at some point I do want to keep doing books that we really love and are really really important. But I do think it would be fun to rip apart a book that maybe is overhyped in our eyes in what we see in terms of mistakes. I think that would be useful sometime.
Oh yeah, we every once in a while we should do a terrible book or a book that everybody thinks is good that is terrible, and
we don't think it's good. Fight us.
Yeah. 50 Shades of Grey is an awful trilogy. Changed my mind.
Oh no, I am not doing that one. That's just escapism trash. If I'm going to do escapism trash, I'm going to do Star Wars or one of my like Japanese light novels or something. So, all right, guys, thank you. We're way off topic now. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you spending into some more short story time with us. Hit the subscribe button. It helps us unlock some features. We appreciate it as a small channel. If you're looking to have some more conversations and go deeper in on the books that you read, please join us in the comments below and let us know what you took away from this story.
Smash the like buttons. Peace.
Peace out, guys.